Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is, now that I've said that, I have to pull up the whole title to make sure we get the title of this talk right because it's so long.
Yeah,
Maine Courses, Writing Maine, How Authors Blend Fact and Fiction to Create a Familiar Imaginary World with Shannon Bowring.
that's me.
Shannon's work has appeared in numerous journals and has been nominated for Pushcart and Best of the Net prizes. Her debut novel, The Road to Dalton, was chosen as one of NPR's Books We Love in 2023 and won the Maine Literary Book Award for fiction. Her second novel, Where the Forest Meets the River, was featured in Oprah Daily's Best Books of Fall in 2024. Shannon resides in Maine. And not only that, we like to say Shannon is a hyper local author to the Patten Free Library because she's so local that you don't even have to leave the building because Shannon is our tech services. She's the whole department. Shannon is the tech
Yeah,
services department at the Patten Free Library. So
I'm it.
she wears many hats. And we are so excited to welcome her to this talk tonight.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be. I think you said I'm the only author in the Me Collabs
Yeah.
lineup, which is
Yep.
really
Yep.
cool. So thank you, Hannah. Thank you for everyone who came. And just to kind of give like a little overview of how I would kind of like to see this go, I will talk about my work, but I would really love this to be kind of an interactive conversation. So if people are comfortable, you know, appearing on video and talking about their own favorite Maine authors and the Maine books that they like. That would be great. And just know that we are recording and this will be, we're going to put it on our patent free YouTube, I think. So just be aware of that. But I'll give you just a little intro to me, although I think a couple of you have already heard this spiel a lot, so I apologize. But I grew up in Aroostook County, all the way up north in Maine, in this tiny little town of about 1,200 people called Ashland. And there wasn't a whole lot going on other than potatoes and trees, and more potatoes and more trees. And I always had this kind of, on one hand, I loved the land. I loved like the seclusion of it and just the beauty of it. If any of you have ever been up there, you know that it's absolutely gorgeous scenery. But I also kind of struggled with the isolation that inherently comes from a place like that. And my way of kind of leaving that world, so to speak, was through reading, which ultimately led to writing. So I was writing my way out of that world rather than being, totally stuck in that world. But the longer I wrote, the more I realized, even though I was desperate to actually physically leave my town, most of my strongest work was centered in that very town. Um, so The Road to Dalton, my debut novel, is about this little town at the top of Maine, population about 1,200. And even though the geography is really real to the place, all the characters and events are fiction. And so I thought that what I would do is just give a little bit of a reading, an excerpt from the prologue of the first book. And then I'll talk a little bit about my experience writing that first book. And then I'll segue into giving just a little excerpt from the second book. And I'll kind of compare how my process of writing it changed, just as, we're talking about changing Maine, evolving Maine. The process of writing this town really changed a lot from the first book to the second book to the third book, which I'll give you a little a little glimpse into for the next one too. So I'll just give you a little bit of a taste of Dalton from the first book to get us centered in this nice Maine place. Imagine this. You are driving alone on a road in northern Maine. Your head still humming from the monotonous drone of I-95, that empty highway. On the radio, nothing but static and outdated country music. A couple miles back, you passed a dingy tagging station where men in orange wool hats and vests stood beneath a massive wooden scale, bull moose hanging upside down before them. Dark blood on the dirt, dead tongue out of the mouth and flapping. The scene passed by so fast you wonder if you only dreamed it. All those men, laughing as the moose swung in the bitter wind. This is Aroostook County. You follow Route 212 west until it ends at Route 11. Then you turn right, heading north at a faded green sign. Dalton 42, Fort Kent 83. On either side of the road, conifers and bare deciduous trees reach toward the sky. Stubborn banks of snow cling to the shoulder. It takes 3/4 of an hour to reach the tiny hamlet of Milton Landing. You slow as you pass a scattering of buildings. Rusty trailers on cinder blocks, general store, bait and tackle. To your left, a wide, slow river snakes its way northeast, blue ice skimming the surface. The sky is heavy with clouds. You pass a lumber mill, where towering stacks of logs and plywood lie on the ground. You may or may not know this, but most of the men in Dalton and Milton Landing and Portman Lake and Barron make their meager living from trees. They operate kilns in the mill, or they schlep into the forest to mark trees for slaughter, or they drive the 18-wheelers that carry the timbers back here to the lumberyard. The dark and dirty beating heart of an entire region. Soon the road widens, the forest retreating to the edge of open fields dotted with clumps of ice and snow. By now, the clouds are so low they might as well be sitting on the treetops. The landscape takes on a depressing palette of gray, white, and brown. You pass no other vehicles. This empty road is eerie, maybe haunted. You pass farmhouses and double wides, collapsing barns that sink into the earth. Down an unmarked side road, the looming silhouette of a potato house. Trees and more trees. Half-frozen fallow fields. Another potato house, more trees. Just beyond a small park containing little more than a metal jungle gym and a horse racing track, you crest a high hill and pull over to the shoulder of the road. Turn off the ignition and step into the gray chill. Stretch your legs, feel your spine crack and settle into its familiar ache. The only sound is the distant thrum of something mechanical, some low-throated throb of chainsaw or motor. Take a few steps further and look around you. Spread out in the valley below is Dalton. You squint, counting 3 spindly church steeples, 1 blinking yellow light at the bottom of the hill. You see a gas station, an empty dirt lot across the street from a convenience store. A bullet-marred sign to your right assures you that Dalton, population 1309, is a DARE drug-free community. Smoke billows out of chimneys on rooftops missing shingles like gaps in nearly toothless mouths. Wasteland. But something like a magnetic pull coming up from the cracked pavement beneath your feet compels you to get back in your car. Put your hands on the wheel. Keep moving forward, slowly and steadily, into the heart of Dalton. So, with that introduction, I really wanted to pull readers immediately into this little town because the book is about a collection of people who live in this town and their lives intersect with one another. And no one's story just belongs to them alone, because I'm sure, as many of you know, living in a town like that, everyone's lives kind of collide with one another. And so at the very beginning of the book, you see this fender bender that, you know, everything kind of snowballs from this fender bender, if you will. So in the moment, it seems kind of innocuous, but you see as the book progresses that it leads to something not innocuous at all, something really tragic. And I don't like to say what it is for people who haven't read that because I don't want to give the spoiler away. But after this thing happens, it really changes the fabric of the town forever, because everyone who lives there has to step back and take stock of what they thought they knew. They have to reconsider how they see their neighbors, their friends, their family, and themselves. And so writing this first book, even though all of those stories were imagined, the way I felt rooted in writing it was by continually going back to my own hometown. So to understand the character of Nate Thoreau, who's the rookie cop, He's trying to do the right thing all the time. He's really kind and decent, but also a little naive. He's just had a baby. He's in love with his wife. And to understand him, I had to understand the town because he loves Dalton. He kind of represents the best that Dalton is, just neighborly and selfless. And so the more I understood the landscape, the more I understood his place in it. And that was true of a lot of other characters too. So every time, even though the plot kind of spools out organically in the first book, I really kept referring back to place and centering it on this landscape that was very, very much how I remembered it. So, and literally how I remembered it. So I would place the water tower in that particular place because that's where it is in real life, in my hometown. And so and I actually took the map of my hometown and I just changed all the street names. So it was really helpful to me to draw on actual memories of an actual place because it brought that place to life in the book. And that's really important because it's all about this town and how alive it is and how it becomes its own character in its own right. And so that was kind of my process for writing that first one. Understanding that all of these characters in this town, their lives are intersecting, and also focusing on making that real landscape like imagined, but not quite imagined, because anyone who still lives in my hometown could pick up the book and point to it and say, I know exactly what store she's talking about. And so with that came a lot of pressure to get things right. I wanted to do a service to a part of Maine that I feel isn't written about very often in contemporary literature. We have writers like Kathy Pelletier who focuses on the Allagash region, but I can't really think of any others good examples of people writing about Aroostook County in particular. And so I kind of took on this sense of responsibility that I wanted to show readers a new part of Maine, which to me was the real part of Maine because it was the only one that I knew for 18 years of my life. And so I wanted to be as true as possible as I could to the place. And that's a lot to take on. So I felt really grateful that I could do that and bring a new, perspective to the literary scene, but I also felt a little bit constrained by it in some ways because I felt like I owed it to the place to get it right. When I started writing the second book, Where the Forest Meets the River, which picks up after 5 years after the events in the first book, checks in with all the same characters, kind of sees how they're coping with this really big tragedy that happened in the first book. Writing it was a little bit different. My process was different. Because even though I was still referring to this place that I know well and that makes me feel comfortable, I was also far more comfortable with the characters in the second book than I was in the first. In the first, I'm still kind of getting to know them, but in the second one, I've been with them for so long that it feels maybe not easier to write about them, but definitely more natural. And I found that as I was writing it, the places that I took from real life were starting to kind of evolve a little bit. So maybe in the first book, I mentioned Davis Road, and it's a very specific road in my mind, the same one that I used to drive on by a different name when I was growing up. But in the second book, as I was writing it, it kind of became this amorphous, not the exact road that I remember, but something that takes on real characteristics and imaginary characteristics. And sometimes, a farmhouse had to be moved from the place it really is to a different place to serve the character and the plot. And so I thought that it would be kind of interesting to read just a little bit of the opening of the second book, because once again, I'm bringing you into Dalton from that same exact route that we took in the first book. However, this time I'm focusing on one character in particular and his particular experience coming down into Dalton from this road. And so I'll read that and we'll talk a little bit more about evolution of character, story, place, and then hopefully we can get some nice discussion going on. The way home gets longer each time he returns. The miles dragging out in an unbroken chain of forest, field, sky, forest, field, sky. Greg can't shake the feeling he's fallen into an episode of The Twilight Zone, doomed to drive the same blank stretch of Route 11 for eternity. He can practically hear Rod Serling's voice as he eases his mother's old Chevy around another blind corner. And here, on this road to nowhere, we have a young man devoted to nothing but distance. Distance between himself and the northern Maine town he left behind. Greg rolls down the window to let the warm spring breeze punch him in the face. Good. He cranks the volume on the tape deck to hear Linda Perry wailing about her disappointment in the world. Better. In the trunk and back seat, stuffed in boxes, is his life as a college freshman. Term papers, textbooks, ticket stubs from the Orono Movie House, Pulp Fiction, Dolores Claiborne. There's the geometric print comforter his mother bought him. Isn't it cool, sweetie? And piles of laundry. Razors, half-empty shampoo bottles, flip-flops for the communal showers. Somehow he ended up with his roommate's Black Bear sweatshirt, the one David wore so often for a semester Greg mocked him for being a walking UMaine billboard. A green sign appears on the shoulder of the road to tell Greg he's got 42 miles to go. Imagining what waits for him ahead in Dalton, he wishes it were 42,000. Lame enough, his sister is marrying the Potato King in a couple weeks. But why did she have to force Greg into being their best man? He and Sarah have barely talked since he left for college last fall. Hell, they barely talked before that, when he was still at home and she was living in a one-bedroom apartment over the store more. Why doesn't Ian have his brother do it? Greg asked when she cornered him beside their parents' Christmas tree the last time he was up north. Charlie's unreliable, she said, and you'll look better in a suit. Seriously? No, not seriously. But at least you'll fit into one now, Greggy, you skinny little stud. Then she poked at his flat stomach, laughing as he tried to squirm away. All through high school, he had been the fat kid. And then the summer before college, Greg had a late-to-the-party growth spurt. Shot up 2 inches and could practically feel his metabolism running on high, vibrating through his veins. Suddenly in possession of more energy than he ever dreamed possible, he stopped binging junk food and took up running instead, hitting the deserted streets of Dalton on early summer mornings before the sun was all the way awake. By the time he left for college, he lost 36 pounds. It's just such a miracle, his mother said, which he guessed was meant to be a compliment, but felt more like a slap to the face, as if only divine intervention could have saved him from a lifetime of stretchy pants and hardened arteries. When he looks in the mirror these days, Greg can now admit he isn't terrible looking. Thanks to his diet and daily jogs, the weight has stayed off, the acne has cleared up, and his thick brown hair behaves without any of that nasty product David uses. At school, girls flirted with him, asked him to parties, and late-night study sessions, even though he almost always declined. But the truth is, Greg is just as self-conscious now as he was when he was overweight. The few times he accepted invitations to frat houses or dorm rooms, he couldn't do much more than choke down stale beer, laugh nervously, and spout off unasked-for facts about how many inches bamboo can grow in a day, 35, and how many pencils could be created from the wood of an average-sized tree, about 170,000. In those moments of attempted socialization, Greg always felt like he was flubbing the lines of a character he didn't understand in a play he would never pay to see, let alone one he would expect other people to suffer through. The pavement and the forest unspool before him, unchanging, while the cranberries play on the mixtape. Rod Serling really would love this. And here we see our 19-year-old as he drives toward the town he left behind, driving closer but getting somehow further and further away. He has got to get off this damn road. So, like I said, I really wanted to still bring the reader immediately into Dalton, but I wanted to bring them through a particular character. And in this case, it's a character that appeared in the first book. And he's changed a lot in the last 5 years. He was 14 in the first book, now he's 19. And he's been through some stuff. He'll be going through some more stuff, but he's one of my favorite characters. And I really liked seeing I liked seeing the town from the perspective of someone who had been there his whole life, who had finally gotten away. He's been at college for a few months, so he has something to compare it to now. But as for the writing process for the rest of the book, as I kind of, this might be a segue, but I will get back to the point, or maybe the whole thing is the point. But when I was writing the second book, I was on tour for the first book. So I would be writing these scenes for the second book, and I would be going to different libraries and bookstores across Maine to talk about the first book. And so there was a little bit of a juggle between not wanting to give away what happens in the first and not giving away what I'm writing about. But I also had this tendency to, when people asked about my hometown, I would answer in Dalton language. I would say, oh yeah, that's on Rich Pucker Road, but really that's not the real name of the road. But my mind kept forgetting the real names of the real place. And so that was really, really prevalent as I was writing this second one. I felt like I was kind of straddling two worlds. And it was an interesting way of writing. It often made it a little bit difficult. But the more I was kind of in that world, the more I realized that what was happening in my writing process for the second book was the best part of what happens when you're writing about characters. So for me, my favorite part of writing anything, whether it's a novel or a short story, is when the character surprises me and when the character goes far beyond what I imagined them to be. So when their experience kind of, I think it's going this way, and then they shoot this way instead. And sometimes it's frustrating to try to keep up with them, but I always feel like it leads to a far more interesting, dynamic narrative. And as I was writing the second book and seeing the ways that Dalton was shifting further from Ashland, becoming its own place, its own tangible, real place, I felt like, oh, Dalton is its own character. And of course it should be allowed to grow and breathe and evolve, just like my other characters do. And so it was a really nice way of kind of writing it in a different perspective, seeing that my work was growing in a way I hadn't anticipated it would, and just kind of having that constant surprise of seeing what about Dalton would be different now. And as I was writing the third book, In a Distant Valley, which will be out October 7th from Europa Editions, you can pre-order from bookshop.org. In that one, Dalton really kind of separates itself, not wholly from my real hometown, but it felt very much like its own place. And the more I wrote it, the more it felt like it stood on its own. And part of me feels guilty about this sort of dissonance, like I've kind of betrayed the real place that inspired this imaginary place. But it's also freeing in a way, because now I don't feel so much of that pressure to get things right. Because I can say Dalton is a fictional town and there are no rules there. If I want to move the railroad tracks for no reason, I can, and that's fine. And it's just been a really lovely experience to see the evolution of my real hometown translated on the page into Dalton, and then seeing Dalton just grow into this universe bigger than I ever could have imagined. And I hope that if you haven't read the first two books, you will. And I hope that you will love the third book when it comes out. And I hope that you guys will come on screen now and talk to me, because I'm just talking to myself. And I would love to answer any questions about my process, or we could just dive right into talking about other authors who have had really good success writing about real, but also imagined Maine places. So unmute your mics and come on in.
And if anyone has a question but does not have access to a microphone, feel free to just type them in the chat and I will go ahead and read them out loud to Shannon so she can respond.
Thank you.
When is the next one coming out, Shannon?
October 7th.
Yay!
Yeah, there was a lot of discussion at Europa. At first, we thought it was going to be early 2026. Readers were very disappointed because the first book came out 2023. The second one came out 2024. And readers didn't want to wait that long.
Yeah.
So my editor worked some magic and got it on the slate for this October. Yeah, I'm excited. I think it'll be a great time of year to be bopping around Maine talking about the books.
Thank you, Shannon. Have you found that people in your hometown reacted to your depiction of the characters or the town itself, or assumed that it was, you know, this person or that person that you were writing about?
Yep, there were definitely reactions. Overwhelmingly, their response has been very positive. I feel really gracious that the people I grew up with have been supportive of me taking their town and kind of bringing it to everyone's attention. And even though every time I talk about these things, I preface with it's not based on anyone or anything, there are people in my hometown who say, oh no, that character is that person. I know it.
Yeah.
Or that person has got to live in that house, right? Like, well, no. But I mean, I think one of the great things about writing, but also one of the pitfalls about writing fiction is once it's out there in the world, it's out of my hands. So the way you read it is the way you read it. And so if my second cousin believes that that person is our, you know, fourth grade teacher, I can't, that's what they believe. So it's really, it's hard to relinquish that control, but you know, it's part of that evolution and it's just how it goes. But it's been great. I went back to my hometown library after the release of the first book and I did a reading and a talk. And there were like 40 people, just my friends and family and my old teachers. And it was so lovely to have this full circle moment of, I used to come to this library as a 7-year-old, 8-year-old, and take out Babysitter's Club books and just wanting desperately to write my own books. And then as a 33-year-old, I was back and I had done it and it was really lovely. And everyone was so just gracious and kind about it. And I think that they're kind of excited that they've made the scene, so to speak. And I still do worry a little bit that I haven't represented the place as well as it deserves, but I hope that I have at least a little bit.
How do you like the touring part?
Let me tell you, I have a lot of mixed feelings about this. And Hannah knows, and Suki knows, because they know me from the library. I am an introvert by nature, as I think many writers are. So while I'm really grateful that I get to talk about my book with people all around, it's also really difficult to leave that private space of creativity and solitude and go out and talk about everything. And just like the physical act of traveling around a lot takes a lot out of me. But it's the life I've always wanted. So on one hand, it's exhausting. On the other hand, it's completely exhilarating. And I've never stopped feeling grateful for it. It's a good question. Yeah, Patty.
Do you feel, excuse me, do you feel like you have more to tell about Dalton and these characters, or do you feel you have other ideas that you want to explore?
So the third book in the series that's coming out in October wraps up the trilogy for these specific characters and this specific narrative arc. And we're ending right at the end of the 1990s. I think that's a nice, it starts in 1990 in the first book, and then we wrap up in 1999. I really like that nice book-ended decade. That said, I still can't leave Dalton all these years later. And so talking about evolution, like the more I wrote about these characters, sometimes I would have a character who sneaked in from the side and I just had an anecdote about them, or even just a name, and I would think, oh, there's a really good story there. So there's all these little stories or big stories brewing, and I would kind of love to pop into Dalton at various times with various people and just kind of keep growing that universe. So I don't like to give away too much about current projects, but what I'm working on now touches briefly in Dalton, but back in the 1940s.
Oh.
Yeah, so like Dalton adjacent. So I feel like I'm kind of copying Stephen King and just like putting Derry/Dalton into everything I can. But it's so much fun that we can do that in fiction, that we can just build these worlds that just expand on and on. And it's so humbling to know that readers connect with it and love it, hopefully, and feel like they're part of it. It's a good question. Thank you.
I think part of it is the way you use words, though, Shannon. You really craft them so beautifully, and I find these little pithy things that you toss in. And really,
I try to be pithy.
I think that's part of it. You connect with that because you hit at a level that's deeper than just the surface.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what Dalton is. On the surface, it's just this little town where nothing happens. But what's going on underneath that, there's a lot of stuff going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of stuff going on in these characters who are New Englanders and kind of taciturn, and they're not going to talk about their emotions with you. But they've got really deep, twisting, turning stories to tell. And I really like exploring all of that and kind of digging underneath that surface of, oh, it's just another small town. But in any small town, you have so many stories. And I'm just fascinated by all the things that don't get told. And so in these books, I'm trying to kind of tell those things that don't always get told.
Might you tell a library story?
Well, I have Trudy the librarian in these books.
Oh, yeah, true.
I had to have a library in there.
Yeah.
So even before I worked at Patten, I worked at Curtis for a while. But before that, I was just an enthusiastic patron of libraries in whatever community I was living in. You have to have a librarian in your book.
Yeah.
And I just loved Trudy so much. She became one of those characters that was constantly surprising me.
I wondered about that. Yeah.
When I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that when I wrote her friendship with Bev Thoreau, at first I thought they were just best friends. And then they showed me that they were much more than that.
Yeah.
And so that romantic relationship was one of the surprising evolutions that popped up. And I'm so glad that I trusted them and I listened to them, because I feel like in many ways, Trudy and Bev are kind of the heart of this trilogy and of Dalton. And I like Trudy's very pithy.
Yes.
But I really love her so much. She reminds me of so many of the Maine women I grew up with. Just hard on the surface, kind of thorny, but you know that they're just like melted butter underneath, and they love hard. And Trudy loves hard, even if she doesn't know how to communicate that sometimes.
Well, she did to Greg.
She did, and that was another one that surprised me. This teenager and 40-something library who become really close friends and garden together.
Yeah.
Which it sounds ridiculous, but then when it happens, you think, oh, it makes sense because they're kindred spirits.
Yep.
Yeah.
I also had a question.
Okay.
So, as somebody who comes from like a Maine tourist town, I feel like a lot of Maine novels that I do encounter are, I like to call them like the summer novels or the tourism novels, where
I hear
it's
you. Yeah.
usually it's usually like taking place during the summertime, or it's like usually written by somebody who is like a summer resident of Maine. No,
Yes.
no offense to any summer residents of Maine, but you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about like, maybe why you thought it was important to, as a main author to write about, the off season and, a place that usually doesn't get like a lot of
Mm,
attention because it's not one of the, coastal communities.
Exactly.
yeah.
And like, that's not to say that the coast doesn't deserve the spotlight. It's beautiful. We're really lucky to be in this really lovely area. But so my role at Patten Free is to catalog all the books that come in. So I see all the new books being published. So I see these non-Maine writers writing about Maine
Mhm.
in a way that often doesn't feel genuine, often feels like what I call kind of literary tourism, where it's just presenting you the same kind of whitewashed version of the coast of Maine that we've been given a lot of times before.
Yep.
And there's a place for that. And I don't disparage anyone who likes that sort of fiction. But for me, in my aim as a writer, I want to bring you to a place that's new, but also a little bit familiar. So I think one of the best things about Dalton is that Dalton is Dalton in Maine or Montana or anywhere.
Mhm.
So I like that universality. But when I talk about specificity, I wanted readers to know Maine is much more than the coast. Maine is forest and potatoes and
Right.
it's not always pretty. It's full of hardworking blue collar people, and there's a lot of poverty and there's a lot of addiction and mental illness. And I didn't want to skirt away from that.
Right.
As tough as those things are, I think that the best fiction explores those tough topics. And I just wanted to show a place can be beautiful, but also very complicated and sad sometimes, but also hopeful. And that to me is what Aroostook County was. It was just this amalgam of everything. You had all these things going on. And even though I didn't want to live there anymore, I still have that weird like pride of place. Like I feel a little bit defensive of the county. Like when I tell people down here, oh, I grew up north, and someone will say, in Bangor, I'll say, there's so much more Maine after that. You have to keep going. And it's a little bit frustrating that in the common rhetoric, like coastal Maine is the place when we know that there's so much more to it. So that's why it was really important to me to show a new place, not ruled by lobster rolls. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm glad that you asked.
No, I think it did. Thank you so much. Yeah, as somebody, like I said, I am local to like lobster rolls, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so it's always that like people are like, oh, I've been to your town. And I'm like, yeah, but it's dead. Like, 9 months out of the year, like you haven't been to my town.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like I really appreciate Maine writers who are writing about the grittier towns, like, Rick Russo with Empire Falls, or Morgan Talty with, he calls it Overtown, but it's Old Town, inspired by his growing up on the reservation. And Ron Curry, who I have to give a shout out to because he was my mentor during my MFA program. And he had a novel come out yesterday, The Savage Noble Death of Babs Dion, I think is the name. And his work is inspired by his hometown of Waterville. So he comes from a very working class town. And I think the reason he and I got along so well is that we're both writing about these different, the real Maine, the other Maine. So if you haven't read his stuff, you should give it a look. He's getting lots of praise for this latest novel.
Say what his name. Say what the newest one is again.
His name is Ron Curry Jr.
I got that right.
Okay. The title is The Savage Noble Death of Babs Dion. I don't know
Okay.
if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's really centered. I think Book Page called it Maine's answer to Fargo. I'm all
Oh,
in.
wow. Wow.
Like that's a great little wrap up. So
Okay.
I gotta give him a shout out. He had a launch yesterday in Portland and I wasn't able to make it, but we've been emailing back and forth today, and I'm just really happy for him that he brought Waterville to the page and people are loving it. If I would like to ask of you guys, if you're willing to talk about it, if you have favorite Maine authors who write about Maine places, I would love to hear it. As a library worker, I want to know what's everyone reading.
Monica Wood.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Very,
She's
very powerful.
she's good. She's one of the good ones. Yep. Thank you for putting that in the chat, Hannah.
For putting that up, Hannah.
Yeah. Yeah, Robin.
Cliff Travis, I think he's only written one book from over. I'm here over in Kingfield, Maine, and his book was Stones of Riverton.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Really, it's really Kingfield.
Yeah.
So, and Travis and I grew up together, and it's a collection of short stories, but every story I knew where he was.
Yes.
So it's a great book.
Yeah, I've met him. He's really nice. And I have family in the Kingfield area, so it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Liz Strout, we would be remiss if we didn't mention Liz Strout.
Yeah.
Carolyn Shute, which is like old school.
Yeah.
Real old. Liz Moore, Sarah Orne Jewett. All the good ones. We're really fortunate to have really strong Maine writers.
Right.
Who don't only write about Maine, but I think they enrich the literary Maine landscape. Tess Gerritsen, thank you. That's a good one.
I think one of the first times I started reading about Maine was in the Ruth Moore books. Those were really, yeah, they're better than the Elizabeth Ogilvy ones, I think.
I haven't read those ones. No, Ruth Moore is really just solid. That's the word that comes to mind for her.
Yeah, right.
It's very real.
Yeah.
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 Anyone else? Oh, yeah.
I have
Robin.
a question.
Sure.
My book chat group is reading your book this coming month.
Ooh.
And I'm trying to write a book. I think I have just one book in me. I'm not a true author. But I've gone through life and collected this collection of things I've heard people say or conversations I've been privy to. One might be, I used to be a Head Start teacher and do home visits. I'm gassing up. It's 30 below zero. And I hear two men describing, one man had tried to, he got a beaver and he was trying to skin it. He was having trouble with the tail. And the conversation went on at how you would deal with the tail of skinning a beaver, which I think belongs in a Maine book. So do you have conversations throughout that you've gathered throughout your life that you included in your books?
I mean, not word for word, but definitely impressions that I've so I have to laugh because that story reminds me so much of my late grandfather and his best friend who also passed away. He passed away actually a year and a day after my grandpa did, and they were best friends their whole lives. But one thing they would do is go out to the bustling streets of Willimantic, and they would look for beavers. And I remember my mother grew up in, what can I think? Monson. She grew up in Monson for a while before she moved up to Portage. And she would say that her father would go out in the woods and get a beaver and bring it back and put it in the bathtub. So they would just go in the bathroom and there'd be a beaver. That sounds ridiculous, but that's Maine to me. So that will have to get in there at some point. I can't think of specific conversations that I have taken and put in the books, but I am also a listener of people and an eavesdropper, not an eavesdropper. Yeah.
Yeah.
a spy. I mean, I think that's what writers do. We just constantly observe and kind of steal, but we try to do it creatively.
Yeah.
You just made me think of Harriet the Spy.
Yeah. I
With her
love that
notebook.
movie. Yes, I drove the adults in my life crazy for a few months because I would walk around with my little composition. But it was so good.
I'll give you another beaver story. I interviewed a
Okay.
98-year-old man from Kingfield, and he was telling me about having almost lived in Kingfield 100 years, and they used to go out in the woods to go sledding. He says, and the beaver trappers would have been there ahead of them, and they would just leave the tails there instead of having to lug them back out of the woods. And then he would tell me how they used them for sleds.
Oh,
So
That
there's
sounds
something
so
you could use.
Yeah, oh man, that's so much like my grandpa. He worked in the woods his whole life, as did his father and like so
Yeah.
I just love those deep woods stories. They're
Yeah.
so good. The Maine guides and their storytelling abilities. Yeah. I didn't know that I would come away from this with two fantastic beaver narratives. Thank you.
I'm not going to use them in my one book I'm going to write.
Well, you've added to the conversation, so I'm really great. I don't know if we have anything to wrap up with. Like, I didn't really plan like an exit for this. I just am so glad that you guys are all here and we're talking about books in Maine. And Hannah, I hear you, but I see you, but I don't hear you.
Oh, that's because my headphones are up. I was just saying that those beaver stories are a pretty good wrap up right there. Talk
Yeah, I
about
mean, you
sense
can't
of
top
place
that.
and yeah.
Well, thank you all so much. Check out the books. We have them at the library. They're at Mockingbird, so go see Terry at Mockingbird and get your copy and pre-order In a Distant Valley, coming at you October 7th. We're revealing the cover tomorrow. I really wish I could have shown you today, but I can't because my publisher is arranging it that we kind of do like a social media post, like. But I want to tell you that the cover is absolutely beautiful, and I can't wait for people to see it. I'm very excited about it.
Very
Yeah.
nice. Thank you very much.
yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Shannon, and thank all of you for joining in with your stories and your author recommendations.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.